Welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every week. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C., is Shaka Ssali himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
I'm good. And yourself?
As I often say, I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, Ndugu Paul, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Let's start with the vaccination programs are currently underway in most African countries. Have started receiving the vaccines for the coronavirus pandemic. This is mainly coming from the international COVAX initiative, an initiative that was started by the World Health Organization, where these rich countries are helping out poor countries to get access to these vaccines. Let's start there.
So far, I think things look good in the sense that the richer countries and the international community seem to be donating sums of money that will be, at the end of the day, probably adequate in terms of accessing the less developed world, the types of vaccines that are available today. And I have seen reports, for example, suggesting that the COVAX, which is put together by the World Health Organization, the UN body in Geneva, has actually started very actively distributing, especially the AstraZeneca vaccine, across the continent. It started from, I think, I remember that it started in Ghana, Ivory Coast, Nigeria. It moved to the East Coast and includes now Kenya, Uganda. It now includes, the Central African countries of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's actually pretty much now largely available on the continent. The question now is how the authorities on the continent in those respective countries get into the business of distribution, whether they in fact distribute it to everybody who is in need, or whether they use the political yardstick of selective distribution. But in this particular case, Ndugu Paul, no one should make a mistake of going about that distribution selectively, because at the end of the day, my security is linked to your security, and your security is linked to mine. This is a global coronavirus pandemic. And when it comes to the disease, the COVID-19, it does not need an immigration visa. It does not need to worry about borders and boundaries and what have you. It is so free. It can actually go anywhere it smells an opportunity. And at the end of the day, it is the human being who will be the casualty. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't give a damn about geography. It doesn't care about ideology, religion. It doesn't care about the color of your skin. It just cares about your flesh.
So you just brought up a very interesting point there. There is a comment from Brian Gong who says we are glad that African countries are receiving some of these vaccines, but let's hope that politicians in Africa don't take advantage of these vaccines to only vaccinate their close relatives and people around them and forget about the other ordinary people. Great point there.
Yes, Brian has a great point, but as I just said earlier, it is not in anybody's interest to actually become biased in favor of one group vis-a-vis the other. Because at the end of the day, it can only be good if all of those who need to be vaccinated, in fact, are vaccinated. Because the disease is not as selfish as some of those politicians that Brian is talking about. The disease is an equal opportunity employer.
Shaka, the COVAX initiative aims to at least to send about 600 million doses to Africa. These doses are not enough, considering that we have over 1 billion people on the continent. We are only looking at maybe 20% of the population getting vaccinated as a result of these vaccines. Are we missing something here?
No, I think that I have had a bit of that concern. As a matter of fact, in the case of South Africa, I heard one of the senior government officials suggesting that he wishes that they had not in fact signed on to the COVAX, that they should have only engaged in bilateral negotiations and agreements with countries so that they could actually buy what they could afford from any country that is manufacturing the vaccines. And South Africa, of course, as you know, is the only industrialized country on the African continent, but is also arguably the most affected, at least in terms of the information that we know, whether it is because it is the only one that keeps an up-to-date data, whether it is the only one which is in the business of making sure that it shares the information that reflects the situation in their borders, I don't know, or whether it is indeed the most severely affected, because it is also arguably one of the most urbanized countries on the continent, which means that you are talking about a country that has many pockets of many people gathering at the same time. That is why public health officials talk about avoiding large gatherings. Avoiding large gatherings. That's why they talk about making sure that you engage in social distancing so that you provide space so that you don't become a victim of the virus. So I think that what is really needed, or what might be needed at some point, is a combination of countries having access to COVAX and also having or developing the ability of negotiating bilaterally. A country can, for example, negotiate with China and get the Chinese vaccine. A country can negotiate with the Russian Federation and get the Russian vaccine. It can also, of course, negotiate with the United Kingdom and get vaccines from Oxford University / AstraZeneca. And you can also negotiate with the United States companies and end up having unfettered access to the Johnson vaccine, which apparently is liked very much because you only need one shot. They call it a jab in the United Kingdom and probably in what is called the Commonwealth. And they call it a shot here in North America. But it seems to me that due to the economics of manufacturing, it's quite possible that the vaccines that are made in China and those that are made in Russia may be slightly inexpensive. especially because of the amount of money that you have to pay the workers. But when you talk about the vaccines that are manufactured in the West, especially in the United States of America, they could actually become very expensive. The trick is that there are some of these companies that have also relationships with a major pharmaceutical company in India,
Serum,
which is engaged in manufacturing what they call or characterize as generics. And so I have seen so far that the Oxford University / AstraZeneca vaccine has actually relationships with that particular company in India. And as a matter of fact, it would seem that some of the vaccines so far that have gotten to Africa through COVAX have actually been originating from India. And so I think that the World Health Organization could probably also help in making sure that some of these major Western pharmaceutical corporations can get into, collaborating with a major pharmaceutical company in India, so that it can be at least much more accessible to countries that may not really be very, very rich.
Very interesting points there, Shaka. Let's go to something that is a little bit political. Tanzania, Madagascar have said they have no plans to acquire vaccines. And Burundi says that at the moment they don't need these vaccines. They will just pray to God.
It is one thing for you to talk about playing God, and perhaps nostalgically remembering those lessons we got when we were very young studying religion in primary school, where you study about this incredible figure by the name Jesus Christ, who is capable, for example, of feeding a very huge group with a couple of loaves of bread. That in practice does not work. I think that at the end of the day, these politicians, who are very important, obviously, in the sense that they lead and they guide their countries, they should, at least for once, at least in the interests of their own people and in the interest of humanity, listen and follow the advice and the guidelines of their more qualified public health officials. Listen to the advice of their more qualified scientific leaders, so that when they make some of these decisions, or whether or not they are going to be in a position to procure vaccines for their people, they should make those decisions based on expert information provided to them by their own daughters and sons who are experts in the field of public health.
Shaka, how would you respond to some fan of yours here, Haswell Dayton? He says, why not Moderna vaccines? Why do the US and other developed countries are not interested in AstraZeneca vaccines? Is it because the statistics show that it's only 60% effective, while Moderna and the other vaccines on the market are over 80% effective, and these are the drugs that they are sending to Africa?
You see, it's quite possible that that is the situation, and that it is probably one of the factors that are considered when some of these countries are accessing the vaccines. I think that what I have seen with regards to Oxford University / AstraZeneca vaccine, according to the South African officials, it is good, but it does not, for example, it is not effective against the more recent South African variant or strain. I remember that even in Europe, there was in fact some skepticism about whether or not the Oxford University / AstraZeneca is something that could, for example, be procured for the people of France and Germany. Not until there were further studies that were conducted by the company to such an extent that they satisfied the concerns of those two major European countries, to such an extent that, in fact, those two major European countries, France and Germany, have since reversed themselves when it comes to the effectiveness of Oxford University / AstraZeneca. So it seems to be working, actually. But South Africa says studies show that it is not effective against its own variant. It is quite possible that that variant is not probably seen in some other countries. But I think the countries that are actually purchasing that type of vaccine should be very, very careful. They should make sure that they conduct some further research, further studies, suggesting that that particular vaccine can indeed make a difference. If it doesn't make a difference, they have options. Then they should definitely go for Moderna. Even though it is very expensive, they should go for Pfizer. And they can also go for Sputnik in Russia. As a matter of fact, I had forgotten about another American major pharmaceutical company. That is Johnson & Johnson. As a matter of fact, the South Africans love Johnson & Johnson. And the good news also, the other good news also is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson. He actually has stated for the record that the vaccines that are going to end up being like bonus, meaning the vaccines that are not going to be used by the people of the United Kingdom will be donated to COVAX so that they can actually be used in developing countries, which may not be in a strong position when it comes to the treasury.
Let me follow up on that point that you just made. How about the simple fact that that would be late in the game? There are countries already, some countries that you've mentioned. Take, for example, China, Russia, India, the United Arab Emirates. These countries are already donating some of these vaccines to African countries. Boris Johnson is talking about donating after the fact. Wouldn't that be too late?
By the way, in fairness to Boris Johnson, that would be in addition to what the UK has already donated to the COVAX. Just like, for example, the United States. You know, the United States was not originally even part of COVAX during the Donald J. Trump administration. It had to take the administration of President Joe Biden, first of all, to return the United States to the membership of the World Health Organization. And then he also made a statement for the record that he was donating at least $2 billion to that fund so that the less developed but needy countries could actually get an opportunity to access some of that badly needed vaccines. Again, it is not about altruism here, and Paul. As I said at the outset, it is in fact the only way that the world can defeat the disease is by coming together, is by uniting. It is not going to help any country to adapt to the policy of isolation. It is not going to help any country to think simply in terms of itself, because the virus is global and therefore has global implications. And so the world is better off, at least for now, to be on the same page when it comes to fighting the virus pandemic.
There is a question here from your hometown, Kabale, from Innocent Mutesigensi. Shaka, I'm a kid from Kabale just like you. I would like to learn more about the vaccines. There is a lot of misinformation out here. What should I do if I come across these vaccines?
Innocent, unfortunately, I might not really be the right type of person to give you what you would call professional advice, because you know as well as I do, and I have tried as much as possible to make this very clear, that yes, I may be Shaka Ssali PhD, but in fact, that is Doctor of Philosophy. Under no circumstances do I claim or could I convert that doctorate in philosophy to a doctorate with a clinic. I am not a doctor with a clinic, and that area, to be very honest with you, should be left to the doctors with the clinics and experts in public health issues. But I can only tell you that as a journalist and as a communicator who does his homework through research, I can tell you that you are better off taking the vaccine. There is no alternative. I think that you should make sure that you follow the advice, not necessarily of your politicians, but your public health experts, your science experts, your doctors with the clinic, your doctors with the clinic's experts, that you should, for example, follow the public health measures of making sure that first and foremost, you wear a mask wherever you are, because you, as a human being, you are part of a social contract with your family, with people in your community, and beyond. You should stay away from gatherings. You should try and make sure that you engage in social distancing, even though it may be very difficult, especially given the cultural and social economic factors in Africa and in Kabale, in this particular case in particular, Innocent. But in addition to that, you should also engage in hygiene. You should often wash your hands and wash your hands with soap. Stay away from touching your eyes, your mouth, your nose. In addition to all that, if you have an opportunity to be vaccinated, Innocent, please go yesterday.
Let's go to another interesting comment from Facebook here. There are a lot of people who are wondering what kind of criteria is being used to distribute these vaccines in Africa. How come some countries are getting over 600,000 doses, 500,000 doses, others are getting like 100,000, 200,000? What criteria is being used to come up with these numbers?
To be honest with you, right from the gate, I don't know the answer to that question. Perhaps what you should do, you should actually put it to one of your nearest public health experts. You should probably also consider talking to somebody from your Ministry of Health or somebody who is directly dealing with those types of vaccines.
To your point, Shaka, there's a comment here from Alex Amin. He says, thanks for making that a great point. I think there's a little bit of competition, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a matter of life and death. If we really need to save lives, then it's paramount that we prioritize the most disadvantaged and most vulnerable people in some of these poor countries, as opposed to these countries saying that, oh, we are going to vaccinate our own people and let the other people just figure it out on their own.
Yes, and indeed, in fact, it could also happen by making sure that some of these major global pharmaceutical companies, which are going to make tons and tons of money, they should also to think about pouring some of the percentage of those profits back into those countries that might need some sort of development, or that might need to figure out a way of recovering from the fight against the disease. The virus has devastated the economies of the world. And the world can only come back to what it used to be if and when those economies are revived. And the only way those economies are going to be revived is some of these projects to get funding from, as I said, from some of these major lending institutions, for example, which were established by the Bretton Woods institutions after the Second World War, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank, but also these global pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, like Moderna, like Oxford University AstraZeneca, like the Johnsons and Johnsons, like the manufacturers or producers of Sputnik, the Russian Federation, and of course, not forget the Chinese vaccine. They should pour a lot of money in these countries so that they could jumpstart their economies.
Very interesting. Any final thoughts?
Well, I can only hope that one of these days we'll wake up and find that the entire world has gotten the benefit of the vaccines and that we are now operating in a new era. But we should basically be there for one another and hold each other's back. There is no way out unless we work together and operate from the same page.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ndugu.